Imagine you're trying to understand how societies change, you know, or how different groups move up the ladder, whether it's like economically or socially. It's a huge, complicated puzzle,
It
right?
really is.
But sometimes the forces shaping all this are really deeply rooted,
Mm.
almost surprisingly so, like something as seemingly ancient as the caste system.
That's absolutely right. Today, we're diving into a fascinating collection of research and articles that really unpack these dynamics, specifically in India.
Okay.
We'll look at how traditional social structures like caste aren't just, relics. They actually interact with modern ideas about economic growth and how society changes.
Hmm.
What's really compelling here are some arguments you might not expect. And then we'll see how real-world examples sort of push back against them.
So our mission for this deep dive then is to explore this pretty intriguing idea,
Yeah.
caste as social capital.
Right.
We need to figure out what that really means. And then look at two major processes shaping Indian society, Sanskritization and Westernization. We'll see how these ideas play out, sometimes in, well, unexpected ways, and what they tell us about how people actually gain status and power.
Yeah, we'll break down different viewpoints, look at the evidence, and ask, do these processes lead to more equality? Or do they maybe, just maybe, reinforce the differences that already exist?
It's fascinating how these old systems keep influencing things today.
It really is, often in surprising ways.
Okay, so let's start with that concept. Caste is social capital. What exactly is social capital, like in simple terms?
Think of it as the value you get from your connections, your social network, basically.
Okay,
The trust you have with people, the shared norms, the things that help people work together effectively. So how could that apply to groups like castes?
right, because castes are specific groups.
Exactly. And some thinkers suggest that these caste networks can actually function as a form of social capital that helps economic development.
Really?
Well, the argument goes that they can, say, reduce the costs of doing business because people within the network trust each other more readily.
Ah, okay. Less need for formal contracts, maybe.
Something like that. Plus, it provides easier access to, knowledge, information, maybe even funding or loans within the community. It's a very different lens to view these traditional structures through.
And who's making this argument? Are there specific examples?
Yeah, there are some prominent voices. S. Guru Murthy, for example, he's described caste as a kind of missing cultural element in India.
A missing element.
Yeah, he sees it as a sort of safety net that prevents the kind of extreme individualism you might see more in the West. He actually said caste is a very strong bond. Castes transcended the local limits and networked the people across. The idea is collective strength.
Interesting. So it's about community connection.
Right, and you hear similar things from others like Gurcharan Das and R. Vaidyanathan. They argue caste provides rules of self-restraint, which kind of smooths how markets work because of that built-in trust. Das even pointed to certain commercial castes, like banya traders, saying they have a natural financial acumen. It suggests these traditional structures might have, well, unexpected economic benefits.
And is there a standout example people point to?
Yes, the Tiruppur story is often cited. It's this industrial town in South India, a huge global player in wear t-shirts, that kind of thing.
I think I've heard of it.
Probably. A World Bank report back in 2001 highlighted its success and specifically mentioned that needed capital was raised within the Gounder community, a caste relegated to land-based activities relying on community and family network.
Wow. So a whole industry built on caste connections.
That's the narrative. If you're a Gounder in Tiruppur wanting to start a business, the idea is your caste network is this powerful resource for capital, for connections, everything. It sounds very efficient, right?
It does sound like a perfect example of community power.
But
Yeah.
it immediately makes you ask, does this kind of social capital really help everyone equally? Or is there another side to this story?
That's the key question, isn't it?
It really is. Because while the idea sounds positive, lots of research argues that this caste as social capital thing can actually reinforce existing inequalities.
How so?
Well, it can deepen the gap between different groups and maybe even create new ways people get excluded. It's definitely not a simple win-win.
Okay, so we need to dig into social capital a bit more. It's not just about friendly networks.
Not always. Thinkers like Pierre Bourdieu saw it as tied to social structures and often unequally distributed. It can reinforce other kinds of power.
So it can be used to maintain status.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
James Coleman had a slightly different take, seeing networks as assets, like owning a building or having a skill. He talked about bonding capital, those close ties within your group, like family,
Okay.
and then bridging or linking capital connections between different groups or between, say, less powerful people and more powerful ones.
Right.
The issue often highlighted with caste is that these networks can be very vertical, meaning hierarchical, and often quite exclusive, not always open and equal.
Okay, let's bring it back to Tiruppur then. The Gounder success story. Is it too simple?
Well, the success is real. A large majority of manufacturers there are Gounders, and the story often told is about their hard work, their uzaiku, framing them as self-made men.
That's the narrative.
But when you dig deeper, you find it wasn't the same path for everyone within the Gounder community.
Ah, okay, so differences within the group.
Exactly. Richer farmers, maybe they invested their farming profits. But smaller farmers or workers, they were often pushed into the industry by poor farming conditions, maybe having to sell or mortgage land just to get a foot in the door.
So very different starting points.
Very different. And there were other ways in too. Things like kashtakutu, a kind of partnership with relatives providing capital.
Kinship playing a role.
Definitely. Dowry too, though maybe not openly talked about. And sometimes larger firms would help trusted workers, often from the same caste, set up their own small units, giving them old machines and orders.
So it's complicated. Being a Gounder helped, but how it helped depended on your background.
Precisely. Access to land, education, the right family connections. These created advantages even within the caste. So you have to ask, is it really benefiting everyone in the group equally?
Probably not. And does this lead to issues within the network?
It certainly seems to. There's evidence that larger exporters sometimes exploit smaller subcontractors, even if they're related.
How?
Things like delaying payments or making deductions for tiny flaws in an order. There's this example of debiting, where if just one order gets rejected by the final buyer, the main exporter might deduct money from all their subcontractors, not just the one who made the mistake.
Wow, how can they do that?
Information asymmetry. The subcontractors often don't have direct contact with the big importers, so the exporter controls the information flow. It shows how that idea of caste solidarity can break down under economic pressure.
So the bigger players within the caste can use the system to their advantage.
Exactly. Accumulating more wealth, often at the expense of their own kin, lower down the chain.
Okay, now what about people completely outside this Gounder network?
Yeah.
Like Dalits, for example.
That's a crucial comparison. There was actually an initiative, THDCO, that set up an industrial estate just for Dalit entrepreneurs. They got subsidies, good machinery, the works.
So a level playing field, in theory.
In theory. But most of those businesses failed.
Why? They had the equipment.
The entrepreneurs themselves often said the biggest issue was market access. The markets were mostly controlled by the Gounders through those very social networks we've been talking about.
So they couldn't break in.
It seems not. Even educated Dalits found it incredibly hard. Without those kinship ties, those social connections, they struggled with everything, getting machines running right, getting working capital, dealing with delayed payments. Things Gounder entrepreneurs often navigated using their networks or land as collateral.
That really puts the social capital idea in a different light.
It does. If these networks act as strong barriers to entry for others, can we really call it social capital for overall development, or does it mainly just lock in existing inequalities?
It sounds like the latter in this case. Inclusion for one group means exclusion for another.
That's the core argument of the critique. When social capital is built on existing hierarchies like caste, it's often inherently exclusive and relational. It reinforces power structures.
Okay, so that's the economic side. But social change isn't just about money, is it? There's culture, too.
Absolutely. And one really fascinating process for how groups try to move up the social ladder culturally is called Sanskritization.
Sanskritization. Tell me about that.
It was a term coined by the sociologist M.N. Srinivas. It basically describes a process, usually over a generation or two, where a lower status caste tries to improve its position in the hierarchy.
Oh.
By consciously adopting the customs, the rituals, the beliefs of higher caste, particularly Brahmins. This could mean things like becoming vegetarian, giving up alcohol, following specific religious practices.
Why call it Sanskritization? Why not say Brahmanization?
Good question. Renavis felt Brahminization wasn't quite right because Brahmin customs themselves changed over time, and the influence didn't always come directly from Brahmin.
Hmm.
He also avoided Hinduization because, well, it implied lower castes weren't already Hindu, which wasn't true. And Hinduism includes lots of non-Sanskritic traditions, too. Sanskritization specifically pointed to adopting those high-status, often text-based Sanskritic traditions.
Got it. So what kinds of things did people adopt?
All sorts: clothing styles, jewelry, cooking methods, like we said, vegetarianism, teetotalism, sometimes even changing the caste name itself to sound more prestigious.
And it went beyond just daily habits.
Oh, yes. It involved adopting stricter social norms, especially around marriage and women. Things like emphasizing premarital virginity for brides, demanding absolute chastity from wives, discouraging or forbidding widow remarriage. Srinov himself noted that often Sanskritization results in harshness towards women.
That's a really important point. Did it also involve adopting new ideas or beliefs?
Yes, definitely. Key philosophical concepts from Sanskrit traditions started to spread. Ideas like karma, you know, destiny, actions influencing rebirth; dharma, duty, the right way to live; papa and punya, sin and merit; maya, the idea of the world as illusion; samsara, the cycle of birth and death; and moksha, liberation. These became more widely known and adopted.
So it was a deep cultural shift. Was it easy to do this?
Not always. There were things that helped. Sometimes clever interpretations of old religious texts, legal fictions, could justify lower castes performing rituals they weren't supposed to.
Finding loopholes.
Kind of. And modern technology actually helped. Railways, the printing press, radio, then they made it easier for these ideas and customs to spread far and wide. Even government policies like laws promoting monogamy indirectly supported some Sanskritic norms.
But there must have been resistance.
Oh, absolutely. A huge hurdle was often resentment from other castes, especially the dominant caste in a local area.
The dominant caste.
Yeah, the group that held the most power locally, maybe through land ownership, numbers, education. If they were strong and didn't want lower castes rising, they could use political pressure, economic boycotts, even physical force to stop them from adopting higher status customs.
So it was a struggle. What did Sanskritization achieve overall then?
Well, functionally, it did spread these Brahminical or high caste customs much more widely through Hindu society.
Yeah.
This, in turn, helped develop a more common culture, unifying Hindu society in some ways. And importantly, it provided a pathway for vertical social mobility, a way for groups to move up, showing that the system wasn't totally rigid, it showed dynamism.
Interesting. Are there examples of groups trying this?
Yeah, studies showed groups like the Chamars in Uttar Pradesh trying to raise their status by giving up beef, changing wedding rituals, emphasizing pilgrimages. It was a collective effort. Other studies saw whole villages moving up together, but some studies also found less evidence, maybe because attempts failed, or some groups preferred other routes.
Other routes, like...
Well, that brings us to the other major force, Westernization.
Ah, right, the parallel process.
Exactly. While some groups were looking up towards Sanskritization, another powerful influence was coming from the West, mainly due to British rule.
So what did Westernization involve?
It meant Indians adopting or imitating British customs, habits, and ideas. And like Sanskritization, it varied a lot by region and group.
What kind of things changed?
All sorts. Appearance, short haircuts, wearing shirts and suits, which challenged old ideas about ritual purity and clothing. Diet things like onions, potatoes, carrots became common, even among groups that previously forbade them.
Even food.
Even food. And new occupations became acceptable, even prestigious, like Western medicine, despite involving things previously considered taboo.
Like touching corpses.
Right. And interestingly, the rise of dowry is sometimes linked indirectly to Westernization. Demand for educated boys with modern jobs shifted marriage economics. But maybe the biggest impact was in ideas adopting scientific methods, accepting Western legal and political systems.
Who tended to Westernize more? Was it evenly spread?
Not really. The upper castes, Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, generally had a head start.
Right.
Largely because of their existing traditions of literacy and learning. They could take up English education more easily and quickly.
And that gave them an advantage.
A huge one. It brought them closer to the British rulers, giving them political and economic benefits. It also increased the social distance between them and the lower castes. Plus, they could adopt Western ways often without facing the kind of ridicule a lower caste person might if they tried the same thing.
So it's really fascinating. Lower castes are trying to become more like the upper castes through Sanskritization,
Mm-hmm.
while the upper castes are adopting Western ways,
Mm-hmm.
partly moving away from those very traditions.
Precisely. That's the confusing situation, as some have called it. Lower castes are imitating customs that the upper castes might be starting to discard as they embrace Westernization. The goalposts are shifting.
That creates a real dilemma, doesn't it? Especially for the lower castes.
It really does. They want the status that comes with Sanskritization in the traditional hierarchy. But at the same time, they often rely on government benefits scholarships, job quotas that are specifically tied to their lower caste status.
You can't easily have both.
It's like wanting to have your cake and eat it too. Meanwhile, you see middle-ranking castes often westernizing quite rapidly, perhaps imitating the upper castes. It suggests that modern markers, education, job, wealth, are becoming more important for status than just traditional rituals.
This leads to this idea you mentioned, the mirage of equality.
Exactly. The argument is that just as lower castes get closer to achieving equality within the traditional system via Sanskritization,
The top groups change the game.
right, the Brahmins and other high castes aren't standing still. They're reaching out towards Westernization or modernization to find new sources of status and power.
Why? Just to stay ahead.
It seems largely about maintaining that suitable social distance, keeping themselves distinct and superior. You see it in migration patterns, higher castes moving to cities for modern jobs, even if it's tough financially, because those jobs offer a different kind of prestige than the old Sanskritic scale.
While a newly wealthy lower caste person might still invest in traditional status symbols.
Sometimes, yes, like building an ornate rest house for pilgrims instead of, say, investing in a modern business or education in the same way. It shows different priorities based on where they're trying to gain status.
So the high castes, unable to go higher, traditionally, basically move outside the traditional system.
That's a great way to put it. They leverage their existing advantages like literacy or networks to get modern education and jobs in government or industry. It's a strategy to preserve their superior position by redefining what superior means.
Which makes you wonder, if the goalposts keep moving, can true equality ever actually be reached? Is it always just out of grasp?
That's the provocative question it raises, isn't it? It suggests a constant dynamic of redefining status.
What does all this mean for Indian culture overall?
Well, both processes, Sanskritization and Westernization, involve change, adopting new things, culture accumulation, and dropping old ones, culture depletion.
Right.
The trend seems to suggest Westernization might become more dominant over time, pushed by industrialization, communication, education, all that modern stuff. But even though they clash sometimes, both processes tend to work towards making Hindu society more culturally unified, even while creating these internal tensions.
Wow. Okay, that was a really deep dive into some incredibly complex dynamics. Let's try to recap the main threads.
Sounds good. We started with caste as social capital, the idea that these traditional networks could actually boost economic development, using Tiruppur as a key example.
Right. The idea of trust and connections helping business. But then we challenged that.
We did. We saw how those same networks could reinforce hierarchies within the caste, like the Gaundars and Tiruppur, and act as major barriers for those outside, like the Dalit entrepreneurs who couldn't access the markets. It highlighted the inequality.
Then we shifted gears to culture, looking at Sanskritization.
Yeah, that process where lower castes adopt upper caste customs, vegetarianism, rituals, ideas like karma to try and raise their social standing within the traditional system, a form of upward mobility,
And running parallel to that, we explored Westernization.
where upper castes particularly adopted Western education, jobs, customs, and ideas. This wasn't just about progress, it often served to create new markers of status.
Especially as the lower castes were catching up through Sanskritization, became a way to maintain distance.
Exactly. Leading to that miraged equality where the goalposts for status constantly shift as the top groups adopt new ways to differentiate themselves.
So the big takeaway seems to be how adaptable social hierarchies are. They find new ways to persist.
They really do. Which brings us to that final thought for you, our listeners, to ponder. In any society, when one group tries to climb the ladder by imitating those above them, do the ones at the top always find new ways to stay ahead? Or is it possible for genuine equality to eventually catch up and erase those distances?